Welcome to the CyberNova podcast. My name is Jannes. I will be your host for this session, and I'm joined here today by Maarten from Adobe. Welcome, Maarten.
Good day, Jannes. Pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you. Can you maybe for the viewers and for me explain in a couple of sentences who you are and what you do?
I'd be happy to. So I'm originally a Belgian, which is a little bit clear from the accent. But today I live in San Francisco and I work for Adobe. We are a soft company that builds software for creatives, for marketers. And there I'm a fellow in the cybersecurity team. And fellow really for us means a senior technical contributor. Until middle of last year, I was the chief security officer. So I led the full security organization. But I decided to make a little bit of a change after I became a dad. Want to spend a little bit more time on really like interesting technical problems and maybe a bit less on running a large team. And so I ended up stepping into that role.
Okay, that's a very nice decision, if I may say so. It's very, very comforting to hear. I read online that your cybersecurity journey started in '83 with the film War Games. Is that true? And how did it spark your path into security?
So in '83, I would have been a little bit too young to start my cybersecurity journey, but the movie is from '83,
okay,
so you're completely right. So really at the end of the '80s or maybe the very early '90s, I saw the movie War Games. And the really interesting thing about War Games is that it has a lot of very realistic cybersecurity depictions. So for instance, Matthew Broderick, who's the star of the movie, he does this thing called war dialing, where he dials a number of phone numbers to try and see if there's a computer on the other side and see how that computer responds to him. And so when I saw that movie, I was very, very intrigued, both by the fact that this was possible, that this was actually part of our reality, and second, by the fact that there was a computer in that movie that actually learned that the game of, as it calls, thermonuclear war really has no good outcome, and the only sensible way is to never play that game. And so those two messages really, really resonated with me as a child, and I do think when I saw it, I kind of decided that this was the area that I wanted to work in. And so it didn't take me very long from my teens to then grow up and figure out that I was really interested in the cybersecurity problem.
All right. Maybe still a question to set the scene a bit. I also read that when you got your first computer, it quickly got a virus. And instead of panicking, you started collecting them. Seems a bit weird coming from my side, so walk me through the process.
So there was, of course, a little bit of panic, and in fact, we picked up the computer, we went to the computer store, and then I learned what an antivirus was. And I don't know exactly why, but I got very, very interested in it. And at about that time, there was a book that was being published called The Little Black Book of The Little Black Book of Computer Viruses.
Okay.
And it was written by an American, and it had code for computer viruses in it. And there was actually an interesting situation where the French government tried to outlaw the book and prohibit it from being published and released in France. And so I think I just got very interested. And I remember typing in the code from that book and sort of just playing around to see what these things were like. Because I really wanted to understand that problem a little bit better. And I think that sort of piqued my interest and led to me being more interested than a usual child in computer viruses. Yeah,
that's a safe thing to say, more interested. Quite an understatement. You mentioned that you grew up in Belgium and then moved to Silicon Valley. What was it like?
So I moved to the US in 2008, and I actually didn't move to Silicon Valley directly. I moved to Seattle.
All right.
Because I had an opportunity to join Microsoft and work in this division called the Microsoft Security Response Center, which is the part of Microsoft that deals with new security vulnerabilities when they get reported to the company. And I have to say, it was a pretty big switch, but I really immediately liked it. So I always liked Belgium a lot, and I still do today because it's my home, and it's where a lot of things happen that are just really amazing. But what I think I really liked about moving to the west coast of the US was actually the pace of technology innovation and how a lot of technology got adopted very, very quickly. Whereas I think here there was always a little bit of a delay before you saw like the very latest things being adopted by companies. The second thing that I really liked was how diverse as a community these companies were. So it was rare that I ever worked in a hallway where not half of my team came from abroad and had very different perspectives on how to solve certain problems. And I always really, really liked debating, like, how can we solve this and how can we figure out the right solution for this problem. So I think those were two things that for me were really, really important. And then also, a company like Microsoft has tremendous visibility into cybersecurity across the world. So you have the opportunity to learn pretty much as much as you're willing to chew off. So I think those were three things that for me were really amazing about that initial transition moving to the US. And honestly, it was then, again, a very similar transition moving from Seattle to the Bay Area, where you have so many technology companies building like the latest things.
All right. I'm sensing already a bit of a pattern in you picking very complex and challenging battles or like engineering problems, because you mentioned that that's what you liked in the beginning, and that's the role that you now stepped into at Adobe as well. Is that true, or?
I think that's fair. Like, I think I've always... So, a funny thing about me is that after I was an engineer, I went back to school to get a master's in international relations.
Okay.
And so one of the things that I learned during that was this theory behind wicked problems. They're problems that don't really have a great immediate solution. Like, you can't just go in and make one change and the problem is solved. You typically need to solve the problem by involving a lot of people, listening first, trying to understand like what has all been tried. And then you can start experimenting by moving little things and see if that makes the problem better. And I do think I tend to hover towards technology problems that also fit into that category. Like things where you can't just code your way out of it today. You have to figure out who your partners are, how you work together, and how you actually go solve it. So I think there's a part of my interest that definitely looks at those things.
All right. Is it possible to define such a wicked problem to someone who is not in the space, or are they very complex and not possible to share towards someone without the background?
I think there's actually a lot of interesting wicked problems in cybersecurity. One example, for instance, is that our understanding of the right technology problems for cybersecurity issues constantly changes. But lots of code was written before those realizations happened. So how do you protect software that was actually written, for instance, a decade ago, but that is still being used today? Because you can't just today go and completely rewrite it against the current rule book and the things that you've learned. So how do you over time solve those problems? And there's usually not one solution. There's many different solutions that you might apply. You might think of things like sandboxing, but you might rewrite certain parts of it that are risky, or you might think of using operating system mitigations that are provided by a whole different set of software than what you're actually building. So that's, to me, one good example of one of these problems in cybersecurity.
Okay, and if I'm understanding correctly, there's not one solution that will work, and it's often a combination of testing different solutions and seeing where you can
and figuring
make
out where
an impact.
you use it. Yeah.
Okay, very interesting. I'm gonna circle back to this later, but I'm hooking on something I read. You wrote that leaders need to explain the why behind decisions. Yeah, it's a fun question because you you shared a story about losing credibility early in a new job.
Yeah.
Can you maybe share that story? Like, why is it so important?
I'd be happy to. So the core thing. So recently I started writing a blog about some of the things that I learned during my career, because I think it's actually really helpful to share those, because I learn a lot from other people sharing their experiences. And one of the examples that I shared was when I started as a CISO at a company. At a certain point in time, in my very first 2 or 3 weeks or something, I ended up stepping into a meeting related to a security issue that we had with the product. And I was very strongly opinionated on how we should solve it, coming in with my external expertise and my point of view on what the problem was and what we needed to do. So in this meeting, I was there with a bunch of engineering leaders, and I just very loudly said, like, this is what I think we should do and we should go solve it. And I could see when I said that, I immediately lost everyone in the room. Because some of them had thought about that solution before, but it was very, very hard to implement. Others felt I was being completely unrealistic and didn't understand the problem well enough. So I noticed that I lost a lot of goodwill in that meeting. So I kind of like thought about that and met with those people and afterwards asked them a little bit about what their constraints were to understand them better. And what was really great was a year later or so, we had a very similar problem. And I went into a meeting again and I was able to share in the way that I did that first time, but in a way that it actually resonated with people. And I think that's really important because what you say really doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't have that much impact. It is how other people perceive it and what they do with it. So I was wrong in that first meeting because I was trying to push an idea that just wasn't really aligned with how everyone was thinking about the problem. And so I think it's very important. I try to do this better now to make sure that I understand the constraints of people before I try to push a solution onto them and work with them to get there. So that's sort of the lesson that I learned from that particular interaction.
Okay. There's just two things I want to ask, but maybe like it bordered on something that I had prepared because you shifted from a leader to an engineer now. And I read that that you're learning to let go in that role.
Yeah.
How does that work? Because there's a parallel there with what you're saying right now. How do you cope with that?
I will say I have done this change a number of times. So I have gone from being an engineer to a manager, back to an engineer. And I think the reason why I've always been flexible on how I solve problems is, for me, it's more about the capability that I have to change a particular problem space. And sometimes you do that by building a great team around you that actually can do that work. Sometimes you need to bring in ideas, and it's actually easier when you're an engineer and you do that yourself. And I was once advised by a leader that I really respected that I had to choose. Do I want to be a wizard or do I want to be a leader? And I still answer that question today when I get something similar with, actually, I will be either of the two, depending on the problem at hand and how I feel I can contribute the most to solving that particular problem. So that's sort of an interesting space for me to play with. This time it was really inspired by becoming a dad and knowing I wanted to create more space to be good at that. But sometimes it has also just been because I felt like I could have the best impact in one of the two roles.
So when someone said you should choose, you said no. Or at least
Kind
not
of,
definitively.
Yeah,
I will
exactly,
choose when I have to, depending on the circumstances.
Yeah, I don't think I said no, but I definitely said something akin to, it depends on where I can have the most impact. Yeah.
Okay, very interesting. You already mentioned that you stepped back as your chief security officer role to become a fellow. How hard was that decision, and how has the transition been for you?
So I think it was actually a little hard because I really liked my team, and I really liked what we were building as an organization, and I liked being the leader of that. That having been said, I always like to think of the things that I've done and come to a conclusion of whether that is something that I will be happy about when I look back later. Because in the end, in the grand scheme of things, a lot of the decisions we make every day, they seem like they don't matter, but they can actually have a lot of impact. And so I feel pretty confident that when I'm older and I look back and I see the extra time that I had to spend with Maple, my daughter, I will be very pleased with the decision that I made. So yes, it's a hard decision from the perspective of I really like doing those things, but it's actually not as hard when I think about it in the grand scheme of things. Also, what does help is that I was able to help hire a new leader, and I hired someone that I really respected and that I had worked with before and really felt that she would make a massive impact on the company as she is. And so that also made it a very easy transition in that form. Yeah.
So you were confident that you left it in good hands, and even
exactly. And it was a very capable team, so it wasn't that much of a worry to begin with.
Okay.
But it was nice to see that there was a great leader that came in that I now work for, which is fantastic.
Yeah, that's an amazing story actually. Just from the motivation to not quit, but like to change, to being so involved that you care so much that it keeps continuing, and then staying in the team and finding a new role. That's stuff to look up to. That's very nice.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed the transition so far.
Maybe looking back on your time as a CSO, the buck stops with you when there's something wrong. You are at the end responsible for the security part of a very large company.
Yeah.
How do you cope with that stress or pressure, or how do you experience that?
I think there's two ways that I think about that. The first one is you cope with it by hiring really great leaders and hiring people that make very good decisions. And when you do that, you can actually feel better because you know that people are generally speaking, going to go into a good direction. And in cybersecurity, nobody is perfect. We all make mistakes. But by hiring people that make good decisions, you kind of increase the overall quality of the work together. The second thing, honestly, is as simple as gardening. Like I really, really enjoy just spending time in nature and letting that go a little bit and doing things like gardening because it is dealing with something that is out of your control. Like you don't control the weather. You can't predict what your garden is going to look like 6 months from now. So you have to kind of disconnect from that and know that if you're doing the right things, you're increasing the odds that good outcomes will happen. And that's a little bit how I like to think about security as well. We can't control everything. We can control a fair amount of things, but in the end, we do the right things and we really work to make sure that they can contribute to the outcome.
That's once again a very nice sentiment. Thanks for sharing. It also transitions perfectly to my next question because you've spoken about the human approach to security, which is kind of what you're touching upon already. But like with machines and AI getting smarter every day, how is the human element still central and still our most important defense for you?
So the human is in the end the control point for any security. Like in the end, they make decisions and their decisions often impact a fair amount of things. There was a speaker at the conference today, Mikko Hipponen. I'm sure you probably talked to him as well. And in his talk, he used this very, very good example of that when we leave it up to a user to click a link and that link is malicious and just clicking on it gets them in trouble, that is not the user's problem. That is actually something that we have not done well. So I think anytime we think about security controls and how we build security for people and for organizations, we need to think of where those people are coming from when they are doing these activities and how we actually help them be most successful. So I think for me, it will always start with the human, regardless of the technology. And then we sort of work our way from their experience and figure out how we can best enable them to do their work securely. So I don't anticipate that will change even with AI. There are going to be modifications that we have to make for specific types of work, for instance, being executed by AI. But in the end, it's still a human process and organization, and it's a culture. And maybe going into culture a little bit as well, I think what is really important is that people within an organization feel like the security program and the security of their organization is something that they are also helping build. And so you do that by building a relationship with them. Like as a CISO, what I always try to do is be very accessible to employees. Like when employees are sharing concerns about something we're doing, I don't necessarily want them to get stuck working with an engineer several levels below. I actually want to be accessible so I can learn from them what those things are. So I can take a little bit of responsibility for that culture and help grow it and make it more security focused and sensitive to it.
Yeah, that was actually one of my questions that you touched, that security is more a cultural than a technical problem. Hereby, I consider this answered. So it's very, very interesting to see your take on that. It also resonates with what another speaker here said. He was advocating email security, and then when they're not sure, you can flag something. And he's like, how can we expect when we're not sure? We built a product that recognizes the patterns. When we're not sure if it's malicious or not, how can we expect Tim from sales to know it? Yeah. Like at that point, it's too late. And it's basically the same as what you're saying. Like, go before that, make sure that that doesn't happen, that you don't put the responsibility upon one person clicking a link or not.
Yeah, no, absolutely fair. I will say I do like the ability for an employee to flag that they're seeing something that is suspicious. I think by itself, that's really powerful.
Of course.
Because, again, it gets them involved in the security program, but we do need to figure out ways then to let them know, like, hey, what did we actually think of it, so that they feel like it's a continuous feedback process and they're helping improve us.
And that they feel like they did something. For me, that would be very important. If I flag something and I get like a notification, like, well spotted, that was a threat of this category, I would go home happy.
It's very powerful then,
Yeah, so that's the culture as well and the involving of people. I listened a bit to your talk. I had the time to sneak in. You advocate collective defense, that we should share information as willingly as the bad guys do too. They're quite good at that. How do you try to make a difference in that?
Yeah, so I think the challenge that defenders have compared to adversaries is that our adversaries, they just need to align their business interests to work together. So they share once it makes monetary sense for them to do so. As organizations, we often have things like NDAs. We have formats that we need to align on and how we want to receive the data. We need to make sure that our technology supports sharing it and that the data isn't outdated. And often we have to edit the data because we can't just send anything we get from our system. Someone else may not understand that. So we actually have a lot of challenges that are sort of ahead of us to make that better. But I think one thing that I've tried to do is I've always really been active in organizations that help bring cybersecurity people together. So for a decade, I was a board member of FIRST, the Forum of Incident Response and Security Teams. And it's a non-profit that actually brings together 850 security teams all around the world. Some part of government, some part of corporations. Adobe, for instance, is a member. And we meet on an annual basis and discuss how we can better respond. We share experiences of incidents that we've dealt with and how we can learn how to do better on future ones. And we have working groups that put together standards. A lot of cybersecurity professionals use CVSS to analyze and prioritize security vulnerabilities. That is actually a product of a working group within FIRST. So I really think these types of communities where we can all come together and have ways of sharing information, especially ways that we dealt with security incidents so we can all learn from each other.
Lived
I think is really powerful. Like lived experience is exactly the right term. It's not actually about sharing highly sensitive data. It's usually about sharing the way that we dealt with a problem and what we learned from it so that others don't have to learn that lesson from scratch every time.
All right. Yeah. Cool. That's a part of the cybersecurity world that I wasn't really aware of myself. The kind of paid forward or share the knowledge kind of way. It's cool to see that it works that way.
It's actually how I think the security community has operated for a very long time. But I do think sometimes we got stuck in ways of sharing and the methodologies. And I think that's actually where AI, for instance, can actually help us be better. Because one of its main qualities is it can summarize things very quickly. So you can summarize information that you have to different audiences much more quickly than you ever have before. And I think those are lessons that we can now apply in these communities to make them even more effective than they are.
So in a way, you're talking about using AI to make the sharing of experiences and best practices easier, faster, and
a little
more.
Bit. So let's say you have a security incident and you have a lot of data on that incident. When you want to share that with others, you have to go and write it in a way where they can actually understand what it is, so it doesn't use internal lingo. You want to exclude information that may be sensitive to you. And that is one place where I've seen large language models and even small language models actually be very effective at helping us craft the information in such a way where we can actually share a lot more quickly and effectively than we ever have in the past.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that it used to be a job or a responsibility that after the incident, someone had to make sure that it was transformed in a way that it could be shared with peers, and that part can now be done way more easily. Then it becomes not such a bottleneck or responsibility of someone to manually do that work.
I would say it was a manual investment that needed to happen.
Yeah.
That didn't really have a lot of benefits for the organization that did it,
Not directly.
but it had benefits for others.
Okay.
And capacity building with others is really important for the cybersecurity community as a whole to function. So in that sense, it allows us to do something that in the past often wouldn't be done or wouldn't be prioritized all the time.
Okay, that's very interesting. That's a very hands-on use case of AI to make, it all work more efficiently, which is very interesting. Maybe zooming in on your gardening story a bit, I read that you grew a sequoia from a seed. Is that true? How big is it? Because when I hear sequoias, I think huge.
So a little bit of background. So I live on the west coast of California. And the west coast has a lot of trees called coastal redwoods, which are also Sequoia sempervirens. They're like the redwood trees that grow closest to the ocean. We also have a beautiful botanical garden in San Francisco, and they sell seeds of these trees and their brethren, the giant sequoia that actually grows in the mountains. So I think it's now about a decade ago or so, I bought some seeds for giant sequoias and I planted them in a pot because at the time I did not have a garden. And today it's a nice little tree. It's maybe like 0.5 meter high. It's not very tall,
Okay.
because it's not actually. So I grow the one that's for the mountains by the ocean. So that's not
Yeah,
ideal.
you're challenging
but it's,
it.
it's doing well, and
Okay.
it's a very beautiful tree. And they are, when you go see them in their natural habitat, they are amazing trees and amazing examples of resilience. They can deal well with forest fires and everything that nature throws at them.
It's almost as you're paving the road into my segue. Are there lessons you learned from growing trees that are applicable to managing teams or building teams?
It's actually the thing I mentioned earlier. Like, you can't control where the tree is going to go. You can only water it well. You can make sure it has the right amount of light. You can make sure it's in the right environment. You can shield it from the wind and so on. And I think it's a little bit similar with with a team. You're really building the team by hiring great people, creating big opportunities for them. One of the things I mentioned in the talk is that quite often we get stuck with roles.
Yeah.
As in, like, we think that we need to assign someone a role when they join the organization. And I like the idea a lot better of giving them a big opportunity or a big challenge to go and solve, and not limiting them to what tools they can use to go and solve that challenge. And a bit of that for me goes back to my background. When I started in cybersecurity, my first year I worked was 2001. And so in 2001, I joined this company here in Belgium called Ubizen, which was at the time a very large security organization. And when I joined Ubizen, I was given really, really hard problems across many different domains. And I could go work on all of them, and I learned incredibly fast. So I had the opportunity to really learn from being given these hard challenges. I think today, when someone new enters the cybersecurity domain, quite often they get sort of put in a bucket of, for instance, compliance or application security or incident response, and they get to do one thing. And what I noticed is that for me, the path to being a chief security officer was actually doing all of these things and learning and growing and honestly failing at some of them a little bit, and then being able to move beyond that. So I really believe that you build great teams by giving people challenges that are a little bit bigger than a single role, and seeing how they grow and what they do with that. And then I think you're setting a team up for success long term.
That sounds amazing. It sounds very, very rewarding, I think, when you get to tackle a challenge not from a certain viewpoint necessarily, but I do believe it requires a quite inspirational management style, or it requires a different way of structuring a team than just filling roles and then you're covered at every expertise and every responsibility.
I think that's fair. I also will admit, I think part of it also is you have to have the resources and the bandwidth to do it.
Of course.
Because some teams are very constrained and they don't really have that ability. But I think it's really about figuring out how can we make some of that happen within the constraints that we have. Because I have tried to apply it within smaller companies. Like, the smallest company I ever worked for was 175 people. And so the security team was very small, and we tried to do that. And then at larger companies, interestingly enough, it's often even harder because people, you may have more resources, but people may be in a job title or a job category. And then you have to figure out, how do we actually create these opportunities? But I really do think that when people are given that opportunity, they can sort of show you what it is that they can learn and grow. And in cybersecurity, it is not usually about being right all the time. It is about being able to learn quickly and figure out, okay, this ended up this way. Now, what if I try this other solution for the problem?
All right, that's very clear. Thank you. Maybe just to round up, is there something you would like to leave behind for the next generation of cybersecurity professionals?
That's a great question. And I get that a lot. And I think for me, the number one thing would actually be to network as widely as you can and figure out as many interesting people that you can talk to. Because that's a little bit what I try to do, and had a lot of opportunities to do it as well. So I do want to be grateful actually to all of the mentors and managers that I've had that created those opportunities for me. But I think creating partnerships with people before you ever need those partnerships is probably the single most valuable thing that a security professional can do. And you'll be surprised by how quickly you will bump into someone from 10 years ago and have like a productive partnership with them decades later, when you actually like need to work with the company that they work for and you're trying to figure out how to solve a hard problem. So that would really be my number one advice. It is to network as widely as possible, talk to as many people as you can, and stay in rough contact so that when there's a problem ahead in the future, you can reach out to them and ask for help or get a different perspective.
All right, that's very clear, and I think it's a very well place to round up because I feel like I have gotten that opportunity today by talking to you. So thank you very much for sharing your experiences, and enjoy the rest of CyberNova.
Thank you very much, Janus. It was a great pleasure, and wish you a lot of luck with the event as well. And I really enjoyed being part of CyberNova this year, so thank you.
It's very good to hear. Thanks.